Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back. So, this is going to be a little bit more of an indirect Chris Chan Quickie article because it sort of isn't, but this is going to be the sort of thing that will cover quite a lot of other people, which I will talk to in relation to subject matter like this, because by the time we get to the end of talking about Chris, which I still think there's at least a year and a half's worth of, because there are some things I want to sort of put a stopper onto, because the debate about whether or not Chris is technically referred to as a dead cow is something that's going to be a bit interesting, but that's neither here nor there. With that being said, let's move on to the subject matter of white knighting, which is always a bit of a curious topic matter. But to be fair now, it's maybe this answer is not near as clear cut, and I would have said immediately don't white knight somebody because it's not a good look, especially if you don't really know the full story, which is sort of in the ballpark of people who already know. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Pro tip. As good as your intentions may be, there is no conceivable way any old e-friend can reach out to Chris at this point and change him for the better. Certainly not by continuing to ass pat and pamper him, which is precisely what screwed him over so badly in the first place, as this wiki evidence copiously. Former White Knight David Chris blocked me too. We defend her, buy from her, and encourage her, a truly repulsive person. Also from Marvin, the man in the pickle suit, White Knights during the Miscreants era was subverted. Their messages blocked, deleted before Chris could see them. If they got through, trolls would leak their conversations with Chris and accuse the helper of being the culprit. White knighting is a term used to describe the act of going on the internet to help or defend someone against other people, out of pity or compassion, or for ulterior motives. People who do this are often referred to as white knights. White knighting of Chris is especially prevalent because of the sheer volume of abuse he's taken ever since we had found his Encyclopedia Dramatica page in 2007. Thanks to the events following from the Idea Guys, most white knights now fall into a subgroup referred to as anti-trolls, those who try to ward other trolls and Teterid members away from Chris to have him themselves rather than for noble purposes. These are not to be confused with the other subgroup of white knights, counter-trolls, who primarily fight against trolls to protect Chris rather to troll him themselves. Counter-trolls are those who take Chris's side to spite his trolls. Some do this because trolling one gullible idiot is less satisfying than trolling trolls, who actually have the ability to understand what is going on. Others have decided that Chris has jumped the shark and are trying to make everyone else leave him alone to put a stop to an old meme which is effectively gatekeeping. In the broader internet trolling community, a wide range of people, from neutral observers to even his greatest trolls, are accused of being white knights. This is most certainly due to Chris's fans discouraging weaning, enabling, and A-logging, acts which, to outside observers, could be misinterpreted as an attempt to reduce trolling. Many of these outside observers are also confused by the tendency of Chris's trolls, including his most prolific ones, trying to get him to improve his life, as they don't know Chris well enough to know it's nigh on impossible to get him to improve using the soft touch. So when the label White Knight gets thrown around, take it with a grain of salt. I would say almost immediately, getting Chris to do better for himself. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The reason why that doesn't work is because you may want Chris to improve for the better, but unfortunately, it's a little out of your control. The only person who can actually make that call is Chris himself. It's not up to us, and because how do we know any better? Who says we have our lives together to such an extent that we have the power and the authority and the dignitas to start lecturing others about exactly what to do. Now, I'm going to make a wild assumption that the people who are already watching this already are aware of something like that, but when we're talking about a slightly broader topic, in terms of, well, take Darkside Phil for example. You know why people aren't really that defendant of him? It's because of mounting evidence of what Phil spends his money on, aka WWE champions, when he constantly whinges and cries that he's going broke, only for it to be revealed that he says this whenever WWE Champions is hosting some sort of exclusive event, and he spends hundreds of dollars trying to get the rarest cards, and it all comes across as pandering, because we know deep down inside, people like Darkside Phil, none of the money you ever donate to him will actually go towards anything in terms of improving his setup, and also Phil's just kind of a little bit of a very standoffish sort of person as well. He's not exactly what you call very, very friendly, and usually when it comes to like trying to white knight notorious lolcows and stuff like that, Topia Chu and Nova Online and stuff like that, well, despite all of the evidence, and to be honest, I think even defending them is actually very, very difficult, I think it's a little bit beyond, it's not really within their interests, because, well, some may say that they've gone too far, or they generally don't see the error of their ways, or maybe the things they do are a little bit beyond their ramifications in terms of logical thought. Sometimes, not always. I mean, some things that these people do are meticulously thought out, and then even for people like Andrew Ditch, by the time we get to talking about that dude in full, trust me, the only people who will defend him are literally, well, like they said, counter trolls. People who will literally only do it so that they can have their way with him, and Andrew can make himself look like an idiot for the amusement of other people. We got all that? A meta topic within the broader Chris saga has been the merits of attempting to help Chris stop being a lolcow, and whether he is deserving of such assistance or even beyond help. Opinion on the matter is somewhat divided on whether Chris is capable of improvement, although most agree that if Chris is going to improve, it will not be in any large part due to the efforts of third parties who only interact with him over the internet. I should also like to point out that currently I'm recording this on the 21st of July 2025, and we're coming up to the 10-year anniversary of the beginnings of the infamous Financiitude crisis. Do you think, for one instance, if Chris looked back on what was an extremely uncomfortable and unpleasant part of his life, he would have known fine well not to repeat the same mistakes as before? Well, then again, when was the last time you ever saw Chris actually take a step back and contemplate, this has happened to me before, I better do something different this time? I don't know why Chris... sometimes I think it's just because Chris would rather choose not to relay bad experiences. We've even heard this has happened like during several Regency 10 therapy sessions, when, to be honest, Chris probably could have done with benefiting from learning from experience. Maybe that would explain why Chris did so badly in school. Even people, it's even a valuable skill in school to actually learn, and experience is a hard teacher, but it's even harder if, you don't like school, or you don't like that level of authority or honesty. And Chris definitely does not like honesty. Anyway, moving on. Some believe that Chris was improving on his own, albeit slowly and in small increments, as seen in his gradual abandonment of his homophobia, which began with him declaring tolerance for lesbians, which he eventually extended to gay men. It did take him quite a long time, but there you are. Others believe that Chris had not tangibly improved and that he was merely moved sideways, rather than forwards. Chris showed signs of improving, however, from mid-2015, having found a new hangout where it seemed he was finally making friends and improving his social skills. Moreover, he finally found a way to cash in on his Eve fame, delighted his fan base by resuming the comics, and made his dreams of a solitary media empire a reality. A rather fleeting one, it must be said, albeit probably on a much smaller scale than he once envisaged. Since Chris's arrest for incest in 2021, and what a segue that is, many of his White Knights abandoned him, and he is now at the mercy of A-Logs and Weens. Motives: pity/remorse. Following the release of Chris's first nudes and the first video in which he reacted to the loss of his medallions and Blanca, many people, including trolls, felt sorry for him. They had not expected it to be possible for him to be trolled so hard or for him to appear so shattered. Empathy. The internet is full of autistic people, man-children, and self-absorbed morons. Many of them are right here, fascinated with Chris. All of them see something of themselves in him, whether it's his obesity, his all-consuming need for female companionship, or his fervent belief that his homemade comics matter. A lot of White Knights have made at least some of the mistakes Chris has made and have since wised up. They think they can help improve Chris by offering the benefit of their experience. Circumstances beyond Chris's control. Chris fails to identify people, a possible sign of proxenoxnovia. Julie and her brother Max used the same voice, and yet Chris couldn't recognize that they were the same person. Love You Long Time played numerous real-life characters, and yet Chris fell for every one of them. Pictures of different women were used to depict Blanca, and yet Chris thought they were the same person. Chris believed that pictures of Megan Fox were of Vanessa Hudgens. In high school, Chris memorized his appearance in the mirror because he had trouble recognizing himself. Since he's never updated his self-image, this is a possible explanation regarding why he denies being overweight. Chris's autism also means that he thinks and sees the world in simplistic binary terms. He cannot easily read between the lines or detect sarcasm, or practically any kind of nuance or subtlety. He's interpreted Family Guy as actually being against homosexuality. When two male acquaintances at the gameplays exchanged sarcastic homosexual remarks, Chris concluded that they were gay. It is also thought that his decision to go tomgirl was at least partially due to him taking advice to get in touch with his feminine side a little too literally. The trolls are even worse people than Chris. Another frequently heard line of reasoning is that the trolls have gone too far, and have demonstrated that they're even worse than Chris, or at least equally pathetic. For example, Blue Spike's sadistic abuse of his control over Chris outraged even trolls. The same can be said for the Idea Guys, who convinced Chris to do extremely degrading things, permanently damaging his way of thinking, and even tried extorting him. The less sophisticated bulk of the trolling was the work of A-Logs and Weens, who are frowned upon even by trolls, and rightfully so. And of course, who really has no life here? Chris or the people who obsessively document and debate everything he does? That's true, but sometimes even the trolls could recognize when things went too far, and when they saw the writing on the wall in terms of, well, in terms of the things Chris did without any influence whatsoever, it's hardly convincing that, to be honest, Chris is sometimes regarded as too much of a lost cause. So there's no point in just, well, beating somebody down for no other reason than self-deprecating humor. Attention whores. Some of these White Knights, the aforementioned anti-trolls, desperately seek attention from the community that surrounds Chris. Sometimes faking their protecting of Chris, a lot like enablers. These people cannot contribute anything to society and therefore will never get a Wikipedia page of their own. So the Quickie or Gino's documentary series is the next best alternative. White Knights with attention on their mind often pretend that they are protecting Chris for noble purposes, when in actuality are trying to gain confirmation from the community through morally questionable techniques. Arguments against white knighting. Perhaps you feel like you have a good case in trying to befriend or help Chris. Maybe you feel like you have a solid plan that truly helped break Chris out of his godlike delusions and or actually take steps in improving his life, all without any sort of ill intent whatsoever. However, no matter how good your intentions may be, you shouldn't even bother trying to do this, and there are many reasons why. 1. Chris is beyond your ability to help at this point. The trolls that allegedly wanted to teach Chris some unpleasant truths about life, along with previous white knights, who wanted to shield Chris from criticism, while genuinely wanting to prepare him for the real world, have consistently come to the conclusion that Chris is simply incorrigible. Nothing helpful that anyone says or does has actually stuck with Chris in a long-term capacity. While he is more than willing to pick up more harmful habits, even Noel, the closest person who Chris had to a friend since the trolling began, and was the only advisor that Chris would actually listen to, came to the conclusion that Chris not only refuses to learn anything if it even slightly inconveniences him, but that he is actively malicious and will ignore you or betray your trust if it benefits him. Even medical professionals are believed to have had a hard time helping Chris, particularly when considering that Chris was just as delusional, if not more so, after 3 months of time in a psychiatric hospital as he was going in. While Chris is a victim of circumstance, now that is sort of true, he can only get help if he actively or actually seeks it, and that he feels like extremely wishful thinking at this point. White knighting Chris now takes on a completely different connotation. An unfortunate shift in the character of Chris's internet adversaries has developed in the Idea Guys' wake. Having caused Chris to believe himself married and a goddess, traditional methods of reaching to Chris as pretending to be a boyfriend-free girl have become obsolete, and in recent times there have been an overwhelming number of people who are confident that playing make-believe with Chris will either help him in the long run or will turn them into trolling legends. Because of this newfound confidence built by playing make-believe with Chris, it has been abused several times and likewise became the means of weeding them out regardless of their intentions. White knighting as a whole has taken a much more negative connotation in the Chris Chan community than it has ever done before. It's also for the same reasons why I have never at any stage defended Chris from all of the really shitty things that he's done. And to be honest, okay, well, how does defending Chris actually help him out? Even at this stage, because to be honest, Chris, even at times, even though he lost 2 years of his life, he has sort of come out the other end, actually kind of okay when you think about it, considering, well, what would have happened if Chris was found guilty? He would have still been in prison to this day. Protecting Chris from specific trolls does not automatically make you a hero in the Chris Chan saga. It goes without saying, but just because you divert trolls away from Chris doesn't exclude you from being a subject of critique. As you have involved yourself in the drama in the first place, no matter the intention, interacting with Chris has always been discouraged by the community surrounding him. Chris's story doesn't really have heroes in it, you see. Anyways, it can basically be described as a sad tale of villains, victims, victims who became villains, villains who became victims, and those who watched the whole sorry story play out. White knighting Chris is not worth the stress. In order to get close to Chris, white knights have to spend at least as much time and effort as trolls to keep up to date on his activities. Most have to lie and pretend to be a goddess of another dimension or a random OC to even capture his attention. This, combined with Chris's habits of pushing away anyone who tries to connect with him, is enough to make any sane non-psychologist crash into slumber. A key example of this is the enabler MKR, who frequently came into conflicts with Jacob Sockness and his other enabling ilk while trying to warn Chris of the danger of letting Sockness get too close, though for narcissistic reasons. As to some extent, MKR simply wanted to keep Chris to herself. Regardless of whether they're white knighting for their own gain or out of some misguided effort to help Chris, white knights will find themselves experiencing unprecedented levels of stress. This is one of the reasons why many simply give up. Meanwhile, even if you do think that your intentions are good and all that, Chris may not even read your messages. For a long period of time, trolls had control over his emails. Messages sent to him by white knights were often deleted before he could read them. Even back in the days of the mailbag, any email submitted to it, if they even got published, would have been given one-word replies and then ignored. Being overly nice to Chris, on the other hand, might have molded him badly and still does. Tempting as it is to feel sympathetic for Chris, despite certain events, doing so would only benefit him from all the wrong reasons. Chris's youth wasn't one without acts of kindness from others, albeit mainly people who were well-meaning yet misguided, at best, or flat-out spoiled him at worst. As a result of others generally opting to shield Chris from even the slightest negativity, with a few attempts at genuine advice going in one ear and straight out the other, he has grown accustomed to receiving or expecting to receive nothing but complete satisfaction with no strings attached from anyone who gives him the time of day. Not only has it led to Chris's tendency to become hostile to anyone trying to show him the error of his ways, and of course doesn't give him everything he wants automatically, but it has also allowed opportunities for enablers to entertain his bizarre delusions, only making him worse than he was before his online infamy. To make matters worse, it has effectively been created a paradox where benefiting Chris prevents him from getting what would actually benefit him, i.e. therapeutic aid he needs but refuses. So even the best of intentions will ultimately yield no positive results whatsoever. Huh. How about that, eh? Meanwhile, Chris won't ever learn his lesson, no matter what you tell him. Due in no small part to the fact that Chris had been mollycoddled by his parents from the very beginning, and had his hand held through school by teachers who were sympathetic to a fault, he is flat out resistant to any harsh truths pointing out his countless shortcomings and the objective fact that the general public, by and large, isn't going to absolve him of responsibility for his antics. He will not take a moment to reflect on his actions, let alone use memories of those experiences to avoid repeating the same mistakes ever again, because he is thoroughly convinced that he is a righteous victim of an unfair society that horribly mistreats autistics. Thus, anyone who goes against his ideals, i.e. denies him what he feels entitled to have, is an irredeemable villain in his eyes. As such, he won't accept any words that don't match what he believes in and or wants to hear. So even simply trying to be nice and reasoning with Chris won't convince him you're not a dang dirty troll. Even ignoring the numerous altercations Chris got into during his love quest, resulting in portraying authorities during their jobs, just doing their jobs as one-dimensional villains for him and his league of OCs to triumph over, and the brutally honest tongue-lashing he's received in many a phone call. A particularly notable example of a white knight unable to make Chris wake up and smell the coffee was none other than Vivian G. After 3 hours of trying to do just that, she eventually gave up, understandably equating the experience with fighting a wall. Supposing that Chris does consider you to be trustworthy, that still doesn't necessarily mean he will benefit from your attempts to help him. A better example would be Rocky Shoemaker, who he considered to be better than a much-needed therapist, yet consistently failed to follow just about every word of advice she gave him, her best efforts to prevent trolling schemes notwithstanding. Going back even further, Chris fondly remembered Virginia Janine Sanford, being his favourite middle school teacher, proclaiming her to be the most influential person of his life, who taught him better social skills, how to deal with bullies, and so forth. He even kept her parting message advising him how to avoid showing others his weak points, and yet judging by the fact that this mere wiki exists, he obviously never took such words to heart. In short, as long as your words are not 100% in line with his childlike and egocentric point of view, it's utterly futile to try and help Chris. Damn. Examples. YouTube. Among the most notable of Chris's white knights was a YouTube counter-troll who claimed to be a 21-year-old Russian model named Zvenka. Via her YouTube account, Hoddy96, she released an inordinate number of screen caps from troll conversations on Sonichu IRC, including private conversations between Chris and Panda. She also released an image of the man in the pickle suit who would later steal Chris's first date, Emily. Were Chris less thick-skulled and even slightly willing to accept irrefutable evidence, Zvenka might have made somewhat of a negative impact on the originalized trolling effort against Chris, but ultimately she was ineffectual. Zvenka also had an unhealthy obsession with the Quickvilles Library original curator Arjen van Dierten. On the 6th of May 2009, YouTube user the Xpinch X North X Star 7, the Pinchius da Bomb, tried to blackmail major trolls, claiming to have information on them. He was easily called on this bluff by someone who had not trolled Chris at all. The Pinch has also threatened Blue Spike, saying he has information from his friends, forgetting the fact that Blue Spike has no friends. Ooh, sick burn. Facebook. From 2012 until 2017, Chris took to using Facebook as his main means of expressing himself. Inevitably, this has not only attracted the attention of trolls, but, in 2013, a slew of white knights as well, in particular William Elliott Waterman, who taunted the trolls to come after him instead of Chris. Spoiler, nobody did because nobody actually cared what he had to say. However, as we've come to expect of Chris, anybody who tells him something he doesn't want to hear are people that needed to be brushed off until they stopped saying those mean, awful things to him. A good case in point is his anger-laced tirade in September of 2013, when he got thrown out of Walmart and started calling names. The White Knights typically chimed in with their support until he revealed that he vandalized an Xbox One display in the store. Several of them that told Chris that this was not the right thing to do, and that the manager had every right to throw him out. His response to this? They do not. And if they do, they are the most in the wrong, because they are the most abusive and overzealous of their authoritative power that never has existed, ever. TV tropes. The TV tropes article on Sonichu used to have a White Knight message as the first text of the article, with a link back to this very page. It was eventually removed due to TV Trope's website policy changing later on. In other words, said message would no longer be allowed on the website. The message is reproduced below. Hey Chris, if you're reading this, you seriously need to get help from licensed professionals before the stuff you do gets you thrown into prison or forcibly committed. And we're sorry, but you have no real fans. The people you think are your fans are really either trolls or laughing at you behind your back. Every last one. Please listen to us for once. From the concerned troopers. Unfortunately, the editor in question fails to realize that their message, while well-intentioned, will do absolutely nothing and Chris will simply ignore it, even if he does fully read and input it for better development. Thank you for your time. In another move that appeared to be White Knight-ish to onlookers, the page was also locked in order to prevent Weens and A-Logs from derailing a page about Chris's stupid webcomic to instead flood it with a trope listing covering his entire life, with entries on Chris and the effort to troll him taking up about 2/3 of the page as a result of overzealous editors piling on an easy target instead of talking about the comic itself. However, the mods took action not out of a desire to protect Chris, but because troping a creator in such a fashion was strictly prohibited, and going into Chris's life in such detail constituted an invasion of privacy that was in direct violation of the site's rules. The subsequent cleanup led to several Sonichu-related pages being locked, with the main page covering the work getting a milk toast and somewhat insincere message explaining the article was being locked over excessive negativity, rather than the page flagrantly being warped by its editors to serve a different purpose than what the site was actually made for. Some Sonichu pages were eventually unlocked and the message was eventually removed, with the goal of actually providing examples of tropes in Sonichu being realized. However, following the incest reveal, the pages were locked once more, and all discussion of Chris's personal life was prohibited on the threat of suspension. The site even toyed around the possibility of removing all of the Sonichu articles and forum threads, but ultimately chose to begrudgingly keep them up. A recreation of what this page looked like before the overhaul by the mods of TV tropes can be seen here, which we might take a look at some other time. And finally, Chris as a White Knight. In 2017, Chris himself began attempting to White Knight the crew of Planet Dolan, particularly Doopy Doo-Rover, after he misinterpreted one of Doopy's tweets about being tired of harassment from Chris himself as referring to trolls harassing her. To this end, he started the #HarassQuick-Directly campaign, in which he exhorted the supposed trolls to take aim at him and leave Doopy and friends alone. This might well have been a misguided effort to win Doopy's affections, after she emphasized that she considers him nothing more than a customer, not even a friend. Eventually, this campaign, combined with his overfamiliar behavior towards her, would earn Chris a block from Doopy later that year. He also bizarrely White Knighted himself in May 2020 while LARPing as Mewtwo, his second husband. Note that he did so as a brief interruption of his marathon session as LARPing Sonichu. Why Chris did this, to be honest, even to this day, it's a bit of a mystery, but, well, lo and behold, this is still, well, this is certainly new carpetbaggers, but, I think the most interesting aspect of this entire little story, if you will, is that we're not saying defend people who can't defend themselves. We're not saying that there aren't people out there who genuinely have no conceived notion that their actions have consequences. Because in some way, they must be in some way self-aware enough to know fine well that, you know, their actions have consequences. What I'm trying to say, however, is that don't feel bad for people who downright walk and talk as though they have said in the past that they absolutely know better. And yet they continue to prove to the whole world that they don't. That's why you don't White Knight Chris. Because Chris is old enough and Chris is actually capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong. Just sometimes, more often than not, Chris chooses to do the wrong things. And he knows fine well they're wrong. But you know what? As Noah has said it before, as long as Chris gets away with it, as far as Chris is concerned, that's all that matters. And all that matters to us is that hopefully we've all learned a little something about this. And this also could apply to copious amounts of other people on the internet. And with all that being said, it's like, actually, to be honest, yeah, I'll make a little thing about it shortly. But until then, I'll see all of you guys again next time. Thank you.